More than half of the people who die of suicide in our country don't have a diagnosable mental illness. Very often it tends to be impulsive. It can also be in reaction to very severe socio-economic reasons and have nothing to do with the fact that you have a mental illness or not. What we've seen up to now is there's close to around 164 stories that we've been able to pick up, which is roughly around 140 suicides and about 24 attempted suicides that have been reported in the 10 largest, or actually not 10 largest, but a large range of English media newspapers which are available online. One is that I don't think they're representative of all the suicides that are happening. And the second thing is that how do you know that it's not media reporting excessively because it's a COVID lockdown? So basically saying mostly that there were suicides related to alcohol withdrawal, people not getting alcohol and so trying to kill themselves or succeeding in killing themselves. In the second and third and fourth week of the lockdown, it shifted, and the reasons being recorded were that people were either afraid of getting COVID, or they had already felt that they had got COVID, or that they were being ostracized by their families and neighbors for having COVID when they didn't have COVID. And then in the last week or 10 days, we are beginning to start seeing stories of suicide where the reasons are, the lack of food or lack of money or lack of employment or, worries about the future and that kind of stuff.
What do you think are some of the factors that are, contributing to this?
So you saw that the alcohol withdrawal suicides were only in the first 8 or 10 days. And then there was no alcohol withdrawal suicides, which is logical because after 10 or 15 days of lockdown, there would be no alcohol withdrawal left. The withdrawal would be over. People would have either died by it or recovered from it. But either way, it would be over. The fear about having COVID, I think that has to do with a lot of the messaging problems that we've seen around COVID. I can understand the simplistic logic of appealing to fear is based on the fact that you want people to stay at home and not go out. So you do use fear as a way of trying to achieve that by kind of saying, listen, if you go out, you're going to die. And that might help people, or that might convince people to stay at home. The problem with fear, though, is that, fear is not like, it doesn't have a volume button which you can control and titrate as much as you want. Once you go down that route, it goes completely out of control. And if you have too much of fear, then people panic. Subsequently, I think the panic has settled a little bit. So I think you're seeing less of the panic and stigma-driven suicides. But I think there's also a realization, a dawning realization of the problems that we are now going to be facing, which are predominantly going to be economic issues. And some of those economic issues have already started hitting people. One of the myths is people who talk about suicide don't actually do it. Now that's a completely wrong myth. People who talk about suicide are actually reaching out for help, and you do need to take them seriously. There's this tendency to say, oh, if he's talking about it, he's not going to do it. If he was going to do it, he would have done it by now. He wouldn't talk about it. The research evidence is very clear that people who die of suicide will have talked about it either to a family member or a friend or an acquaintance, and frequently even to their doctors if they visited the doctor for some reason. So when people talk about suicide, it's important to take that seriously. Another myth is that people who are suicidal will always remain suicidal. That's why you see people using terms like suicidal tendency as if it's kind of a personality trait, which is not true. Many people who feel suicidal feel so at that point in time because of a certain set of circumstances and events. And if they get help at that point and they get past that point, they may never feel suicidal again and they can continue and go ahead and live pretty long life. The third myth that commonly is there is that you should not ask people about suicide because you'll give them ideas. which is completely makes no sense, because it's a bit like, imagine I'm talking to you and I say, are you feeling suicidal? And you say, oh God, thank you for reminding me. I didn't think I was feeling suicidal, but now that you reminded, yes, I will feel suicidal. There are other myth that exists, which is that if a person is suicidal, then they have to have a mental illness, or the way police will look at it, sometimes authorities will say, oh, but he had a mental illness. As if, first of all, as if having a mental illness means that it's okay to die of suicide. Half of the people who die of suicide in our country don't have a diagnosable mental illness. Very often it tends to be impulsive. It can also be in reaction to very severe socio-economic reasons and have nothing to do with the fact that you have a mental illness or not. A message which doesn't seem to go out very well is that suicides are actually preventable. Okay? There seems to be a sense of fatalism, both among our society as well as among our policymakers, that what can you do? People are going to die, they're going to die, which is not true. There are lots of interventions you can do at the policy level which can bring down suicides. So suicides can be prevented, and unless you believe they can be prevented, you will not do what is required to prevent them.